is Lydia, and I'm the Vice President of GLOW. I'm going to be giving a talk about gender today. And I would like to be over there, but there's no clicker, so I guess I just have to use the mouse.
Do you want me to be the clicker?
Sure, Jules.
Just signal me when to do it. I won't be like John. I'm kidding, I love John.
Okay. Alright, so first I want to go over some terminology. Gender is a personal identifier that can describe how somebody feels about themselves, their place in the roles associated with said gender, or lack thereof. Now, it sounds a little convoluted and it's kind of hard to understand, and that's because gender is a little hard to understand. Gender is a social construct, and it's, I don't want to say it's arbitrary, but it's not inherent. Anybody can be any gender regardless of their body. And we usually correlate gender with body, so that can get a little difficult. But the way that I see gender is, have you guys ever seen those optical illusions where you see black dots around, but then when you look directly at it, it disappears? Yeah, that's kind of like what gender is. You examine it too closely, and you realize that it doesn't really need to be there, and it actually kind of isn't there, unless you make it there. It implies social and cultural differences rather than physical, sexual ones. So this is sort of a really big issue and a misunderstanding that people have as far as gender. They think that gender and sex are the same thing. Gender is more in your head, it's what you identify as, whereas sex is your physical body parts. And like I said, it's hard to pin down with one definition because it means different things to different people. Some people identify strongly with a gender and they feel that it's important to follow the roles associated with said gender, but some people just don't think it's that important. So it can really vary a lot as far as what it means between people. And like I said, sex is the physical state of having your vagina, your uterus, your penis, your testicles. Something between the two sounds a little odd to some people, but intersex people are more common than a lot of us realize. I'm not really qualified to talk about that. I don't know too much about the topic, but it really is something that needs to be brought into better attention. So people are assigned both gender and sex at the same time when they're born. But sometimes things can get a little iffy, and they might be either intersex or they don't identify with the gender they were assigned at birth, which is where we get the term transgender. Gender presentation is the clothes, pronouns, and the overall first glance appearance that a person presents related to their gender. So if you see somebody wearing a dress, then their gender presentation would be feminine, because we associate dresses with females, with vaginas. It's really not a difficult concept, but it doesn't necessarily reflect their gender identity. So cisgender means identifying with the gender you were assigned at birth. Most people in this world are cisgender. If you have a vagina and you say, I'm a woman, I feel like a woman, I've never questioned that I'm a woman, you're cisgender, and vice versa for men. Transgender means identifying with a different gender than the one you were assigned at birth. So trans men, trans women. Now, some people think that trans man and trans women are actual genders, but trans men are men, trans women are women. It's kind of impolite to say that there's something different. A lot of people feel that way. And non-binary means that you have a gender that's not male or female. So, binary refers to a duality, two things. And those two things in this case would be male and female. So non-binary means you're outside of that. And non-binary is actually a subset of transgender, because people don't really assign non-binary genders, at least in our society, to their children at birth. So some non-binary people identify as trans. They like to use that label for themselves. Some of them don't. It's really a personal preference. So what I want to really focus on today is non-binary genders, because I feel like it's something that a lot of people don't know about, and something that a lot of people don't understand even if they have heard of it, because you hear a lot of untrue things in the media. People say, oh, that's a he, she, that's, other slurs that you don't want to say. And it's kind of confusing when you hear about these things for the first time, so I just want to clarify some things. One gender would be genderqueer. This is genderqueer flag. It means not subscribing to a binary gender identity, presentation, and or beliefs. They can identify in a variety of ways. Genderqueer can be an umbrella term, or it can be a gender in and of itself. So some people might say that gender fluid is something that falls under genderqueer, like genderqueer is an umbrella term for non-binary. But other people just say that it's their personal identity. And some people consider it the third gender. Gender fluid means identifying with different genders over different points in time. So one day you might feel female, one day you might feel male. You might feel genderqueer. And it changes over time. That's like the big thing. And some gender fluid people feel that they're one gender at once, or that they're multiple genders at once. It's something that varies between people, and gender presentation can really vary depending on what they feel at the time, or they can just keep the same type of presentation throughout. Agender. I personally am agender. I don't identify with any gender identity. It's sort of a gender neutral thing. It's also sometimes tied to the belief that gender is a social construct and it's not really inherently necessary or real. And that's kind of why I identify as agender, because I recognize that it is a social construct. It doesn't determine who I am or who I need to be in life. And, that's just me. It doesn't reflect how anybody else has to see themselves, but that's how I define it. Demi-girl and demi-boy, or demi-gender, means feeling a partial connection to female, male, but not entirely. And sometimes it can be in combination with something else. But the main gist of demi-genders is that you feel like you kind of have this connection to something like a gender, but you don't really feel it wholly. And some of you might be wondering at this point, well, how do you know? How do you feel that connection? And it's really hard to define it. I think it's something that a lot of people just sort of know at some point in their lives, especially if you are cisgender. You feel like it's just a part of you, inside of you, in your brain. And I don't know, it's hard to describe. So then when we go into gender presentation, when you look at the traits up here, you can sort of see things that make sense, Masculine, you think loose clothing, you think short hair, flat chest, deep voice, what you would think of as somebody who has a penis, who was assigned male at birth. And then you have the feminine clothing, which is generally the opposite, because we live in a binarist world, and, we think that there's opposites and nothing in the middle. But the fact is that there is a lot in the middle, and there's a lot of different ways to combine these things. Such as in gender nonconforming presentation. You can just click through all of them. For example, for women, having not visible makeup or not wearing makeup at all, having short hair. Ellen DeGeneres, she has short hair. She doesn't wear heavy eyeshadow or lipstick, even though, she's on TV. She's wearing more expensive concealer than all of us. But, yeah. So they usually have more open posture, more confident posture. We associate having your chest out and your shoulders broad with men, and we associate sort of being demure like this, more closed posture, protecting yourself with women. So when you see someone being loud and boisterous and sort of gesticulating, that's also kind of gender nonconformist if they're female. And then for men, it would be wearing visible makeup, shaving your body hair. besides your facing or pubic hair. I know some guys are real into the manscaping. That's not necessarily gender nonconforming now that it's sort of mainstream. And we have somebody down there who is gender nonconforming. They actually won the Eurovision singing contest a few years back, which is really cool because you don't normally see people who are gender nonconforming out in the public like that, winning awards and stuff. They don't usually become famous. Okay. So, what does a non-binary person look like? If we've got all these gender nonconforming attributes or gender conforming attributes, what do we use to define somebody who's non-binary? How do you look at somebody and say, this is this person's gender? Well, the short answer is you don't. You really can't tell a person's gender by looking at them. Non-binary people and people who are trans, binary, or cis can present in a lot of different ways. So when you think of androgynous, what do you think of? Julia just said me. Which is actually a really good example.
This little cluster right here.
Because you've got the short hair, sort of a slim figure, and more narrow hips. Not really a deep voice, sort of a higher voice, but your voice can be pretty deep sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the way that we usually think of androgynous, think of stars like Ruby Rose. She's out as gender fluid. And, she's got the short hair, she wears those boyish clothes, tank top suits, etc. So, we've got a few attributes, but that's not necessarily the way that androgyny presents. Because the thing is, when we think of androgyny, that sort of means gender neutral, right? So why do we associate masculine traits with that? Why do we associate the short hair, the flat chest, the slim hips, not wearing the clothes coded as feminine as gender neutral? Why do we think that that's gender neutral? It's because Kristen's raising her hand.
Is it sexism?
It's sexism.
Wow.
Because we think of male as the default, and we think of female as other, or sometimes even lesser, whether we're realizing it or not. And that's just because of sexism, something that is prevalent in our society, whether we like to admit it or not. So, non-binary people can definitely fit this description. Ruby Rose is definitely non-binary. She defines as gender fluid. But this isn't the only way to be non-binary. If you've seen me walking around campus, you've probably seen me wearing skirts. You might have seen me showing some cleavage. That does not make me any less agender. It doesn't mean that I'm a woman. It means that I like wearing skirts.
Oh,
And
hi. You changed the order of the slides.
I'm sorry. I didn't realize I did.
Your slide was first.
Well, you contributed to this.
I did.
Would you like to read off?
Yeah, okay, I'll do that.
We were originally going to have more people contribute, but nobody contributed, so here we are.
Yes. Hi, I'm Em. You all know me. So the original purpose of this whole bio section was for more people to participate, but people weren't able to participate, and that's okay. So I just kind of did it the way I thought that I wanted to, which was sharing my story or whatever. So when I was 16, I went through this giant gender identity crisis. I was like, oh shit, who am I? Because when I was young, I always identified as a tomboy. I was one of the guys, rough and tumble, I didn't wear skirts, I don't like makeup, whatever. I just wasn't a girl. My mom and my dad used to poke fun at me all the time, oh, our third son, and shit like that. That was always fun. So I went on Google, because Google's where I get all my information, and I found the term transgender, and I found this whole community of female to male transgender people, and I was like, shit, man, that's me. So I genuinely believed that that's who I was at the time. So I went through this whole thing. I bought all of these different clothes. I got a binder that I still have. The only reason I haven't given it away is because it has some blood on it. I don't want to give that to anybody. And like I started to go to school like that, and then I realized like I was uncomfortable. Like it wasn't like I didn't want to make that type of change. I also couldn't do sports in my binder because I would like die because you can't breathe properly. And then like I didn't realize that there was like no in between. Like I was like, I either have to be a girl or I have to be a guy. And I was like, well, if I'm not a girl, then I'm a guy. And I was like, well, I'm not a guy. So what am I? Like, oh shit. Another thing, I was like, oh, I'm not straight, so what am I? So now it's, I'm not a girl, so what am I? That's the life of a gay person, I swear. Oh shit, what am I? So I went back to Google and I was like, I found like gender queer and like gender fuck and gender fluid and all of these gender insert not conforming related pronoun here. So I kind of identify as that. Like if you're ever with me in the wintertime or in the fall when I have to wear a sweater and my voice is kind of deep, I guess my hips don't give it away. It's thanks sir or great job boyo. At work I get he's a good kid a lot. I get that so much from old men.
Yeah,
So much. But like I also don't care. Like you can call me a guy, like I don't give a shit. Or you can call me a girl, like I don't give a shit. Like I present female, like I outwardly identify as female because it's easier and I don't care at all, really. Hello. So that's just kind of my spiel. I like identifying as androgynous. I have like the stereotypical like masculine, sexist, like androgynous traits.
Yeah.
But that's just because of my build and because of the fact that I like my hair short because it's so freaking thick. I don't like it long, I look really bad. And I don't like wearing makeup, but like at college, like when I was in high school, I was so young and I really just thought it was just guys or girls. Like that's it, you had to pick guys, you had to pick girls. So I rejected every feminine part of who I was and I just went with all of the boyish things that I had known my entire life and that I had been exposed to when I got to college. Like I started wearing makeup a little bit, so sometimes you might see me wearing makeup and I started wearing dresses. Like I came to that meeting in the dress the other day. I look really fucking cute. So like it's all about like embracing who you are and just kind of listening to your gut. Like if you're sitting here and you're like, shit man, what am I? Like I don't feel the way society has made me think I am, then like I embrace you to explore that. Because what's the worst that could happen? You explore this huge community of people and you come back to the same conclusion, I am a woman or I am a man. There's no harm. You just reaffirm the fact that you are what you thought you were, or you found yourself along the way. And I found myself, and I know who I am. Yay, that's my story. Moral of the story, I don't care about, like, gender, my gender. I care about yours.
Alright, and then me. Like I said, I'm agender. I identify as gender neutral. When I look in the mirror, I think when I realized that I was agender, I thought, I look in the mirror and I don't see a woman. I see a person. That's it. I don't see someone with a gender. I don't see a woman. I don't see a man. So I realized that I was not cisgender when I was around 14 years old. I was going into high school, I remember. I had just figured out I was bisexual. So a whole bunch of things happening at once. And when I look back, I realized that there were always a few signs that maybe I wasn't female in gender. Like I remember I was talking to my mom, and she said a while back, you haven't had your hair short since you were 3 years old. And I said, I don't remember having my hair short when I was 3 years old. And she said, oh yeah, you had it cut really, really short, and people always thought you were a boy, and you were so happy with that. And also things that she's told me, one time you were 7 years old and you were crying in Target because you said, I don't want to wear girls' clothes, I'm not a girl. So looking back, maybe it was always there, maybe it wasn't, I don't know. But I tried a lot of labels on because, like M, I thought, okay, well, you gotta be one or the other, nobody really tells you you can be something else. So at first I thought, okay, I'm female to male transgender, that's who I am, I'm gonna gonna get those boobs cut off one day, and and just start, growing a beard and stuff. And then like I realized I don't really want to have facial hair, and also I really like wearing dresses. So I identified as genderqueer, I identified as gender fluid. Eventually, I think it was like my senior year going into college, I started identifying as agender because at that point I just said, I don't care. I don't care, and I really don't feel like it's necessary for me to pick something. So why do I have to have a gender at all? I recognize that gender is a social construct, and if you're taking a sociology course, let me tell you, they're going to talk about social constructs and how gender is one. It's not just me saying this, I promise. And I've definitely struggled a lot with not having the stereotypical androgynous body type. But, I'm starting to embrace and realize that femininity is something that's completely valid as an agender person, as a non-binary person, and I encourage everyone to just sort of look at the people around them and think that, maybe gender isn't so black and white. And look at yourself and realize that maybe gender isn't so black and white. Like Em said, it's not something that's going to end badly if you start exploring it. You might encounter some roadblocks along the way, but if you start exploring things about yourself, there's nothing that can go wrong from self-reflection. There can only be growth from self-reflection, and that's something that I really believe. So, on that note, does anybody have any questions? I know that it's kind of a weirdly done presentation, but
It's a really hard topic to grasp.
it is kind of a hard topic to grasp. I have a hard time explaining it, even though I know a lot
There's no
about it.
vocabulary for it.
Yeah, there really isn't.
There's very, very little discourse on the world of gender. Oh, I thought she said it's because of those damn sexists. That's literally what I heard. I thought you said it's because of those damn sexists.
Thank you, buddy. Wait, yeah, we got a question.
Wait, we have a question.
The terms that are mentioned, the dummy girl and the dummy boy,
Mm-hmm.
and when did that come up? Like, how was that? When did that come up? Was it in textbook? How did you learn about that?
I learned about the way a lot of people learn about non-binary genders through the communities on the internet. Which, I know it sounds stupid. Just because the internet says it's true. No, that's obviously not true. But, when you look at other people's experiences, I feel like that is the best way to learn about gender. To look at other people's experiences and realize just how varied it is. And there is a huge non-binary community on the internet, partially because it's kind of hard to find each other in real life since you can't actually see a person's gender and know what their gender is. You sort of have to ask them. And that's kind of awkward in real life. So, as far as when it sort of came into being, as far as when demi-girl and demi-boy became a thing, I can't give you exact dates on that, of course, but something that I think a lot of people mistakenly believe is that these non-binary genders are a new thing, that they're a fad, that it's just kind of, something that these crazy kids are doing nowadays. No. They've actually been around in cultures around the world for thousands upon thousands of years. There's third gender people in India, in Mexico, in all sorts of tribal places, and all sorts of, more upscale places. And I think one of the most important things to realize is that this is a real thing. It has been established. If you're not seeing it, it's just because the world isn't telling you about it explicitly. Any further questions?
I don't have any questions to question fire you today.
Oh.
How did you know? How do you have sex? Like, that doesn't apply here.
Yeah, it does.
You already answered how you
You
know.
mash two genders together.
Whatever
Not
happens,
wrong.
happens.
She's not wrong. You mash two or more genders together.
Yeah.
You never know what's gonna happen.
No, it's a grand mystery. I mean,
It's out of this world.
My gender is out of this world, you guys. I love this shirt. I wore this shirt specifically for today. I like dressing up for things.
I like when you do that.
You always have a shirt for whatever you present.
I
Great.
do.
I love that.
I dressed in the bisexual flag colors when I did the bi presentation.
did. I need to come up with a video then.
So like anyone's free to go. I mean, Glow usually has a stay around and chill for like an hour.
Yeah, for
That's
those of
just
you,
how we work. But like if anyone wants to leave, you can. But you're also free to stay around.
for any of those who haven't been to one of these and you have a gay question for any of our gay members or straight members, like this is the
Please
place to
ask.
ask it.
I'm
'cause
gender
we
fluid.
I love
don't-
ask- I love
like
answering
we take the
questions.
most offensive questions in this room at face value and we'll answer them.
I
So you can
love
literally ask anything that you're curious about if you've never been to one of these meetings before.
I can show you privately.
Oh, I am sorry.
Yeah, you are.